Welcome to the Amber Nectar podcast, discussing the things we think about Hull City AFC.
Welcome along. Good to see you if you've joined us live on Periscope. On the eve of the 10th anniversary of Hull City winning promotion to the Premier League for the first time, we're here to remember an occasion that still makes anyone involved on the day go a bit misty-eyed. All the modern day successes and riches, all the publicity and attention that for more than 100 years we simply never got as a club, can go back to Saturday, May the 24th, 2008, the first day of a long bank holiday weekend, a scorching hot day in London, when a team of fine footballers led by a gifted manager who epitomised self-belief took to the Wembley stage to try to reach what was, to the uncynical, hopeful Hull City fan, raised on non-achievement and mediocrity, the promised land of the Premier League. And they did it. And we have, for all kinds of reasons, never been the same since. All season we've been building up to this on the Amber Nectar podcast. Every week we've talked about whichever game or games from 07-08 was having its 10th anniversary at that time. At times it's provided much needed respite from a wretched current existence for Hull City. And now finally we get to talk about what I would assume personally, and maybe hope, remains the greatest day in our city supporting lives. Simply because until that day we didn't know what the emotion of supporting a properly successful football club was like. Your memories are welcome on Periscope, of course. If you're viewing us live this evening, you'll observe to my left our special guest, former City midfielder Bryan Hughes, who played 39 games in the league that season and went on to play every minute of the playoff campaign. We're privileged to welcome Bryan, and I suspect his memories of the occasion are a little different to ours, and certainly less hazy through intoxication. We'll come to that. Les and Andy, as ever, are here as well. And Bryan, I'm going to come to you first. Thanks very much for joining us. We're really pleased to have you here. Tell us about the immediacy after the semi-final. It finished 6-1 on aggregate against Watford. We were going to Wembley. We were in the playoff final. We were 90 minutes away from the club going somewhere it had never been before. What were the club celebrations like?
It was just euphoria, wasn't it? You know, the old KCOM stadium was just bouncing after that final whistle. I remember being in the stands, celebrating with all the players and families. Back into the dressing rooms, it carried on. You know, I think everyone was just so emotional. You know, because we believed in ourselves that season, and it come to that game in the playoffs there that sort of got us over the line, and we realised that we were going to Wembley. Were you allowed to sort of let rip for that night, knowing that the next day all that would be over and more serious business would begin? Yeah, I think so. I think Phil Brown was good at that. You know, we were. I think all the way through that promotion campaign, we had a very sociably sort of group, you know, that interacted really well off the field. You know, not just the players themselves, but the families, with the wives. Big part of it that year. You know, keep your house home, your home happy, and it sort of works well, doesn't it? You know, for your working environment. So that's the way we sort of ran it that year as a team, as a playing staff, and no more so than after that game. Phil Brown was very positive in that, and he let us get on with things after the game, have a few drinks, celebrate with your family and friends, and then have a day off the next morning to recover, and then
which you needed,
and then get back to business really and start concentrating on what was lying ahead.
I think our celebrations were slightly less reserved than that, Andy, weren't they? I mean, I'm trying to remember which pub we went to, but wherever it was, we were there for quite a long time, weren't we?
Do you remember Magma in town? The only place that would serve till 4 AM, so that's where I went. It wasn't the classiest of joints, but
I think most of us had a day off work the next day. I mean, the thing was, we were all, and it was such a rare beast for us that we could be so optimistic because of the way the first leg had gone, which meant that we had that cushion in the second leg, and therefore we could all, if we needed to, book a day off work the day after the second leg because we were 2-0 up, and surely nothing was going to go wrong, Les.
Yeah, but it didn't feel so confident when Watford scored first, did it? So I think when you're accustomed to City not doing particularly well or chucking away promising situations, you know, that felt like the most #typical City thing ever. But, you know, it didn't work that way, and we ended up powering through 6-1. Magma around, you classing, haven't you?
It's like that time
I'm not proud.
That time 20 years ago when you met a former chairman of Hull City in tropical nights on the marina, and Andy couldn't go because he was underage.
Excellent. You know what is interesting for me is, because I presume from the players you were thinking from the point of view as we could go play in the Premier League now. I think as a City fan I was just thinking, my God, we're playing at Wembley, because it seemed something that was beyond the capability of City in my support in life. You know, the fact that we got to an Associate Members' Cup final in the 80s, and it was played at Boothry Park in Hull.
And we lost.
The next year it was played at Wembley. It just sort of felt we are never, ever going to go to Wembley. So I don't think at the point I was even thinking of, we've got a chance of playing in the Premier League. It was the excitement and the novelty of the idea of City being at Wembley.
See, I think from a player's point of view, that was just an added bonus for us. I think throughout the whole campaign, we were confident of trying to get promotion that year. There was certainly turning points throughout the season that helped that. You know, the introduction of Fraser Campbell was the timing was impeccable. I thought from Phil Brown bringing Fraser at that time, we were lacking a little bit of pace up front. But the aim of the season was to try and get to the playoffs, and try and get promotion. You know, that's why I certainly come to the club. That's what Phil sold to me and Paul Duffin. And then obviously on that night when we got past Watford in the semi-finals, it was relief to get to the final. And like I say, the Wembley feeling was just an added bonus.
When the next day you had your morning off the next morning after the semi-final to recover, as you put it, and then you're back to training. Did training change at all because it was a Wembley final that was approaching, or was it sort of same old for the next few days until you made the journey down south?
No, it was very similar. You know, Phil was very ritual in his patterns. We sort of done similar sort of things, worked on tactics. I think if people look back onto the team that year, we were very organised. You know, we had 2 banks of 4. We were very organised out of possession. We worked really hard for each other, and we still went down the same methods in the training regime. As it got closer to Wembley, obviously the training changed slightly. You know, we had to get down to Wembley. It took us a few days beforehand. We had different things, starting to relax a bit more, trying to get a mindset where I think it's quite easily some players who haven't been in them situations before can get a little bit excited, a bit excitable, and I think that's what Phil done really well. I thought on that build up to Wembley, he sort of took our minds away from the game.
The local media had gone into meltdown pretty much immediately, if you remember, Andy. I mean, we were, and not just locally, but we were listening to the local radio stations. The Hull Daily Mail was full of pullouts and extra pages written by Phil Buckingham and his colleagues about what was going on. And I think if you are from Hull and not a football fan, or certainly not a Hull City fan, I think it would have been easy to underestimate just how big an occasion this was, simply because it had never happened before in any context at any time. We were 104 years old, and as Les said, it was about going to Wembley. But if you did think, unlike Les at the time, of what was the prize at the end of Wembley, it was top-tier football, and that had never happened either. There were so many bits of history waiting to be created over one game.
Well, I guess you only ever have your first time at Wembley once, don't you, obviously, and that was the big thing. It is fascinating that all I could think of was the same as you, Les, was Wembley, and the players were thinking Premier League. I don't know, I couldn't even think about the Premier League until probably a couple of days before the game, because Wembley was the thing. We were finally going. I think we were something like the 7th last of the 92 clubs to get there. We managed to avoid it for a long time.
Yeah, I think from a player's point of view, looking at it, our aim was the Premier League, and like I say, Wembley was an added bonus. I think it was because we went so close to the last game of the season. We were still in with a shout of getting automatic. We still felt we could get automatic because we were on such a good run at the time. But that defeat against Ipswich away in the final game of the season put pay to that, and it just showed the character amongst the squad to pick yourself up. Obviously, after the final day defeat, and then go into a semi-final, quite a hostile away game at Watford, and showed the performance that we actually did, and it just brought out the characteristics that we brought together throughout the season, I thought.
Yeah, that was one of the questions I was going to ask. Was that something where Phil Brown had to pick up the side, or was there a bunch of self-motivated individuals who could take that upon themselves to do?
Yeah, I think it was Phil helped, but I think at that stage, I think it was mainly down to the players. The players, like I said, we were very, very sociably together off the pitch. We were sociable at our training ground. We used to stay for hours after training. You know, you don't see that nowadays. People come, train, they're gone by 1 o'clock. We were still there come 4 or 5 o'clock. You know, just interacting with each other, finding out each other's lives, and that, I think that took us right through to the end of the season, where, like, when you had to dig in for each other, you know, in certain games, and no more so than the final at Wembley for the second half.
Did it help those who perhaps were not, I mean, you're not local to the area, but you're an experienced footballer and you've also experienced major finals, both playoff final and the League Cup. But did it help generally some of the other guys who were in the squad who didn't perhaps realise the local significance that you had Dean Windus and Nick Barmby amongst your number, who were Hull through and through and could actually say to the other players, look, this isn't just about what we can achieve, but it's about what you can create, a sort of a heroism and a mystique you can create for yourself in this city if you get this right.
Yeah, I think Nick and Dean had a big hand in that. You know, they were very good in the dressing room. They were very vocal, both experienced pros. You know, people looked up to them, and no more so that they were from the area, like you mentioned. I think, like you touched on it before, the media coverage that we had. That you can't hide away from that. You know, Phil Buckingham in the local press with the 24-page spread. I still remember that now. It was quite. If I was a young lad looking at that and going into a major cup, a big final like it was, maybe I might have had a few jitters. I've been at them, like you said. I've been at them stages. You know, like the cup final against Liverpool, the playoff final for Birmingham. Lost 3 times previously in the playoffs, so I'd been in them moments anyway. So, but for some of the younger lads, it might have been a bit intimidating. But like you say, we had people like myself, Dean, Nick, Ashby, Wayne Brown. We had a lot of experience in the squad that really galvanised everyone.
It's fascinating you mentioned about how there was a definite atmosphere of the club trying to keep the players happy. I remember we used to do the fans liaison meetings with Paul Duffin, and he used to talk about staff at the club in such terms where he was sort of saying it's important that everybody at the club is happy and content in the job. So it's interesting to hear it from the players' point of view that was a holistic approach. He wanted everyone at the club, whether there was a player, whether there was staff, he wanted everyone at the club to feel happy in the job and feel belonging. That's quite fascinating.
Yeah, there was a big sort of camaraderie amongst the players. You know, that the team bonding was very strong, and that was from early on. You know, when I first signed for the club in the summer, we flew off to Italy, and that really knitted everyone together, and it just progressed throughout the season.
So, I mean, we had about a 10-day gap, didn't we, between the semi-final and the final. So let's go through the I'm fascinated by the chronology of this and the logistics of this. When did you go to London? Where did you stay? And what did you do while you were there?
Right, well, we went down to London, I think it was a couple of days before. We stopped halfway down. Phil took us for a spa day. We went to Champney Springs, one of the top ones in the country, which was really nice. We spent the night there. We trained at Champneys and then spent the evening sort of going through a few things, socialising again, which was just part of our DNA, I guess. Then after that, we went on to the Grove. The night before the game, the Grove Hotel, we stayed there. We trained at Arsenal's training ground previously, and then we went back, went through a few things, watched a few things on the videos, went through the analysis, ready for the next day. On the way there, actually to the Grove, we actually stopped at Wembley the day before. So Phil was quite adamant that he didn't want us to have that first sight of Wembley when we first turned up on the day, you know, especially with some of the lads like I just mentioned who hadn't been in them situations. He didn't want them to freeze. We went there beforehand, we got pictures, we had to walk around, thought it was a masterclass genius to do that, and then we come away. And then on the day of the game, we arrived at Wembley Stadium. We'd already been there, to knowledge. Obviously the day before we knew how the size of it, we knew because it was the new Wembley, wasn't it? And we just a sea of black and amber everywhere, you know. Straight away you can just feel the tingles coming through you as you're going through on the bus. But yeah, it was fantastic. When we got into the dressing room, Phil didn't want anyone to go out and have a look again and start waving at the families. He didn't want us to go out until the warm-up, which I thought was really good as well, because by that stage it was started filling up. There was a lot of people in the crowd, and you couldn't just stop and stand and start waving to your families. It was focus. It was on the game. You know, 30, 40 minutes before the game, it was time to go to work, and I thought that worked.
And by contrast, our preparations were slightly different. I mean, you know, we were all in different situations with work and so on. So when you can travel, where you're going to stay, you get what you can. For my part, I remember, because I was working for KCFM at the time, so I was offered a press pass and I declined it because I wanted to be in the crowd rather than in the press box where I've been all season. And I remember going on lastminute.com to get a hotel room. And I had one of those deals whereby you got a London hotel room for only 35 quid for the night. This is the Friday night before the game, but they don't tell you where it is or what it is until you've agreed to the pay only 35 quid. That's the deal. So I thought, well, I'll do that. So I paid me 35 quid. They still do this.
Tower of London.
It was a Radisson on Warren Street. I was dead chuffed. I got a really good room. On the Friday night for only 35 quid, which, you know, let's face it, you're lucky to get a cardboard box in London for 35 quid, even 10 years ago. So I was dead chuffed with that.
Welcome to the TripAdvisor podcast.
Absolutely. But from our point of view also, there was the problem with travelling, because there was the issue with trains, because it was a Saturday, and Hull Trains didn't have enough people. I didn't have enough sort of seats to get enough people on who wanted to travel on the day and then travel back again. And you might recall also, I know we're going slightly ahead here, but you might recall also Leeds United were playing Doncaster the next day, and there was in the League One playoff final. Being small time, obviously, and there was a really big panic going on about what would happen if all three sets of supporters happened to meet on the platform at the same time. So this is a bit of a contrast to what the players were having to worry about.
I do remember that, actually.
This was the sort of thing that we were having to think about. But ultimately, our night before, while they're in the Grove, was all about the World's End, wasn't it?
And you know, I think our group was very focused too. We were focused on any nervousness that we had was going to get obliterated by alcohol.
In the World's End, a Gothic pub in Camden Town.
Camden, it was this, wasn't it? What I remember of it. I remember that our hotel was, I think, the Ibis or something like that overlooked Wembley. So on the morning when I opened the curtains, I could see Wembley. And
he gets up at 5 a.m. all the time. He did back then before he had children. He gets up at 5 a.m. all the time. So you took a photograph of dawn breaking over the Wembley Arch, didn't you?
The sun was just peering through. It felt like an ermine.
And at that point, that could have been the highlight of your day. But I mean, so we get to Saturday morning. We've all been down there. We're all sleeping off the hangovers and having breakfast and whatever else. So the day
I was probably arguing with my Richard girlfriend at that time.
I was trying to
never be mentioned again.
I was trying to find out. I was trying to avoid that if at all possible. When did you find out you were playing? Because the team was unchanged eventually from the playoff semi-finals. When did Phil Brown make it clear? Same starting 11.
Yeah, we knew the day before, so people knew who was playing. I think he named the bench on the morning.
Now that was different because Dean Marnie was fit again.
Yeah.
Now, did you? Dare I ask? Did you have any worries that? Because he'd been in the side before you up until the end of the season. He got injured at Ipswich on the last day and missed the playoff semis, both legs. Did you have any concern that you might be recalled?
I didn't have any concerns, no. I know we've done a really good job, you know, as a unit in the semi-finals. So yeah, I wasn't concerned. I was just focused on playing. I was happy to be playing in the centre. You know, by Dean getting injured, it got me from the left into the centre and brought Nicky into the team, which was good, you know, for a local lad.
And then it was a case of getting there. Do you remember we were allocated a different pub, the two sets of supporters, weren't we? The Hull City fans were in one side of Wembley and Bristol City fans in the other. And it was the hottest day of the year, wasn't it? We could talk about it being the hottest day of the year in sort of slightly glib way, but it genuinely was. The temperatures backed it up, and we drank quite a lot of beer that lunchtime and through into the early afternoon, and none of it touched the sides because it was so hot it was just coming straight out again.
I've always wondered if it was the heat, because must have been mid-20s, or if it was just the nerves and what was coming, because it was unlike anything else we'd ever done. So you could have a pant and it just wouldn't touch the sides because all you could think about was Wembley.
It also started something of it became an FA Cup tradition afterwards, certainly for a couple of years following that playoff final. But I seem to recall in that pub we spent about 2 hours singing songs for previous players. And you haven't lived until you've been in a Wembley pub with Hull City fans singing the Stuart Elliott song to the tune of Kumbaya. It was such a. It was an out-of-body experience even before the match, wasn't it? Because it was just surroundings that you simply weren't used to. You were experiencing something new all the time.
Yeah, and that is fascinating. What I'm liking, what I'm hearing about is Phil Brown's approach of sort of giving the players no surprises, that sort of habituating the players to Wembley so they're not overawed the first time they walk out with it, announcing the team the day before so that, you know, they've slept on it and there's no morning nerves. You know, it's interesting that, and yeah, I suppose it is juxtaposed with ours. I mean, you know, bunch of unprofessional slobs that we are.
Speak for yourself.
Well, yeah, I will. You're right. For us, everything was about habituating to this, habituating to going down Wembley Way, you know, and sat there gawping and taking photographs and, you know, being in overpriced pubs and thinking, oh, well, whatever, City are at Wembley, I don't mind paying £6 for a bottle of Carling or whatever. And yeah, you had to
That's
sort of
10 years ago as well.
You had to sing songs to entertain yourself because they were pretty gruesome places, weren't they? You sort of got the feeling they'd not had a health and safety inspection ever. And they used the fact that they were generally so packed you couldn't see how rancid the floor was or that kind of thing. Yeah, interesting.
If you're watching us on Periscope, you'll see that I've got my 08 shirt on, which I did wear on the day. Leslie's wearing the change kit from that season. Andy's got one on as well, although you wore a tough shirt on the day because you always do at the big matches. What's the point? You might see Bryan Hughes' shirt behind us on Leslie's mannequin, and that isn't just any old shirt from that season. That's your playoff final shirt, isn't it?
Yeah, it certainly is. That's the shirt that I wore on the day. Still keep it safe to this day.
Well, you've got to get out of the house yet.
Yeah, exactly.
You'd won the playoffs before. I know you said you'd lost 3 playoff campaigns previous to that, but you had eventually experienced what it was like to win them under Steve Bruce. Was it under Steve Bruce
Yes.
at Birmingham? The League Cup final was under Trevor Francis, wasn't it? And Andy Dawson had won the playoffs as well before for Scunthorpe, albeit a couple of divisions lower. The experience specifically of the playoffs, did that help you when it came to, I'm thinking in particular of Fraser Campbell, who's now a veteran, 10 years on of Hull City, but he was this exciting 20-year-old thing, top scorer, but still an inexperienced player who was going into a big environment that he would never have dreamed of going into when he was playing in the A-team at Old Trafford. Did you have to do anything as an experienced player, along with Ash, maybe Barnby, with Fraser Campbell to make sure he was in the right frame of mind for the occasion?
Not necessarily, no. I think Fraser was just that character. He was full of energy, he was bubbly. I think he just thrived in them conditions, and he's done that since that day. He's gone on to bigger things, playing regular in the Premier League. He's had his injuries along the way. But yeah, I think he just loved being the centre of a team, being the centre of attention. He's a striker. He had a big role to play in the winning goal. And from our point of view, I made reference to him before with regards to the timing of his coming to Hull City. I thought it was great. It was a great moment for Fraser to come. He just give us a new lease of life at that point. I think we were about 15th, 14th in the league when we signed Fraser Campbell, and from then on we started getting a bit more consistency and it just gave us another outlook up front, I think.
I'll tell you something else that it was only when it happened afterwards that, because we got home, in my case, I got home at about 11:30 that night and watched the whole thing again on telly with one more beer before bed, absolutely spent. But I noticed that JJ Kocher and I think Henrik Pedersen were there, even though they were ruled out of the final. And having those kind of massive characters and personalities and seriously good footballers around, even if they're not involved, it epitomises just what the squad system is like, I suppose, for when you really need it for those really big occasions, because the players who aren't contributing on the pitch necessarily are still going to make a contribution off it.
Yeah, totally, and JJ epitomised that, and Henrik Pedersen, they've been in the Premier League numerous years. JJ captained his national team, Henrik was an international. They were great to have around on that day. Well, in the build-up, they came with us the whole time. So yeah, I think JJ, he was still hungry to succeed, even at that age. Coming to Hull, it didn't quite work out for him with his injuries, but he was such a big presence around the training ground. Certainly helped on that day, like I mentioned, and yeah, it was great for me just being alongside him. Throughout that whole year, I've been chasing him around for 8 to 10 years previously. So yeah, it was good to have him as part of our squad.
So Andy, you and I and Tony walked into Wembley together. Tony Dutton. We walked in as a 3 from the pub, and we walked through the vomitory into our area of the ground before we split off into our separate seats. And do you remember the 2 banners for the 2 clubs that were hanging, seemingly from the heavens, but they were hanging, and the players were coming out onto the pitch wearing the track tops that Les still covets to this day. And I suppose you can talk about how you feel leading up to the occasion as much as you like, but then it hits you, doesn't it? And it really hits you hard. Shit, this is happening.
Well, it sounds so daft. It sounds like the most obvious thing that any human being has ever said in the history of human discourse, but Wembley was just so big. You walked in and you thought, I know, of course it's 90,000 seats, of course it's bloody big. But when you stood in the bottom tier and you look up and you have to keep looking up for a little patch of sky, it was... I know they spent a fortune on it, and I know it might, maybe not in the right place, but my God, it was absolutely amazing, the stadium. I was blown away by how good it was when you were in there. It was much better than I thought it'd be.
I had been to Wembley prior because I'd gone to the NFL game the year before. The Giants and the Dolphins had played, so I was used to sort of the size of it. But what struck me was that 50-50 split of colour, where you had you know, half of the bowl was red and half of the bowl was amber. That just looked incredible. I suppose if you're colourblind, you're probably not going to see that. But you know, I was sort of genuinely struck by that sight and the sheer colour of it. And of course, we're not used to that magnitude of City fans being in the same place. You know, I know City, you know, famously got 55,000 in 1949, and they had periods in the 60s where they was getting over 30,000. But, you know, I'd grown up watching Hull City playing at a crumbling Breakthrough Park that, you know, had one game where it had over 15,000 there, and then it was clearly smuggling people in and pretending they were in and not including them in the official attendance. And even though we played in the, played at the KCOM and sort of filled that as a top team in the lower division, it was still only 25,000. All of a sudden, you was confronted with the sight of 40,000 people wearing the club's colours, and that you know, how do you habituate yourself to that when you haven't seen it? That was an incredible sight. So for me, it wasn't so much the stadium, because I'd gawped at that the year before, but it was more the City fans filling the stadium. And just briefly going back to JJ Kocher, I think I sort of think where he helps, even though he wasn't involved with the business end of the stadium, was the perception of the club. Because I think when he signed for the club, it sent out a message around the country that, well, if JJ Kocher can go to Hull City, anybody can go to Hull City. And I also think it perhaps softened the way the national press looked at the club ahead of a playoff. You know, it's just to me just changed the perception of the club in the national spotlight, that we'd gone from being little Hull City, who was in the lower leagues 10 years previous, and you know, not even that long before it, to a team that could attract Henrik Pedersen, could attract JJ Kocher. So I almost think the contribution they made to the club transcended whatever they did on the pitch, because, you know, they entertained us a couple of times that season, but I think their contribution, it was almost fitting that they were watching the game in the stands rather than playing, because I almost think that was what they were brought in to do, to sort of like lift the perception of the club. I don't know if that might be alone in thinking that.
Well, I was just going to say to Bryan, I mean, with JJ Kocher, this isn't meant to be unkind to any other midfield player that season in the City squad, but if you've got JJ Kocher, and whether it's you, whether it's Ian Ashby, Dean Marnie, or any other central midfielder that might happen to be involved, it's still like having a partner who is on another planet, isn't it?
Oh yeah, certainly is. And he had so much ability, didn't he, JJ Kocher? I remember when I first signed for Hull City, I think I was the first signing that season. Phil Brown, when he was trying to sell the club to me, was sort of mentioning these big names. He mentioned Juninho, he mentioned obviously Kocher, Pedersen, the other lads who he brought in, obviously Windass staying, Richard Garcia. He was looking for players that were still hungry, you know, to try and succeed and take the club forward. He had a dream, you know, Paul Duff and the new chairman coming in. They had a 3-year plan to try and get the club into the Premier League, and miraculously we've done it in the first year, which was brilliant. But like you say, JJ and Henrik and all the other lads everyone who was associated with the club, you know, there was comings and goings that year, you know, McPhee, Delaney, people like that who'd already been at the club and helped along the way. They all had a big part to play.
Okay, so we get to 3 o'clock on that afternoon. I just want to ask you this. You've talked about how the training was fairly standard between the playoff semi-final and then when you first went to London. So you lined up, national anthems, shaking hands with the dignitaries, and you're standing opposite your opponents, knowing that you're going to cross sides and go and warm up on the Wembley pitch. Is it still just another game at this point, or has it now turned and you realise, if you didn't before, obviously you as an experienced player already knew, but you realise the momentousness of what was about to happen?
Yeah, obviously you knew the implications of the game. You know, it was a massive game for both teams. You had to try and treat it as another game. Otherwise, you get caught up in the emotion, like I spoke about earlier. And I think that first half, I think it was quite even. I thought Bristol came out; they didn't show many nerves. We didn't show any nerves. We tried to play when we got the ball. I think the first goal was always going to be crucial, you know. And we got the first goal, and what a goal it was! But I think from that point, going forward, especially the second half, You know, Wayne Brown got injured. He was struggling at the back. But that defensive unit had played a big part in where we were that year. You know, the back four didn't change very often. You know, Turner, Brown, Dawson, Ricketts, Bowes-Mile. That was the core. You know, the midfield changed now and again. You know, Ashby was always in there. Then it was either myself, Marnie, Barnby, Garcia was a regular on the right. So there was a real core to the team, and we've been put in these situations on the training ground through Phil to deal with this. He was quite big on playing overloads against us as a back eight, and how well we could deal with it. And the second half, Bristol City threw everything at us, everything, and there was some absolutely magnificent performances, you know, by Ricketts, Turner, throwing the bodies on the line for the club. But I'd seen that so many times on the training ground, so it was just natural for me to see it again.
I was going to ask you, tell us what you remember, because I'm fascinated to know when you're in that situation whether you can actually. They always say try and enjoy it when you're in a big occasion, because it might never happen again. Obviously, this wasn't your first occasion in the playoff final, but it was for some of the other lads. But I was beginning to wonder whether you, amongst all the other players, like me, and I think like Les and Andy, actually found ourselves remembering very little, because I still remember so little of the actual 90 minutes. And I think you're the same, aren't you?
Well, the certain instances that I remember as though they happened this morning. I mean, the goal, for example, and Brown jumping on Miles' back, and other little things like that. And I think we're going to touch on it in a second, when Bradley Orr went down. That was, I don't know if it was a pivotal part of the game. It felt like it was to us. I remember little pockets of the game so clear. I remember Trundle turning and shooting, and 8 times out of 10 that season he'd have put that in the bottom corner, but he just passed it straight into Miles' midriff, and little things like that all stick so clearly in the mind.
And if you have got memories of that particular game, they're often less significant than they should be. I mean, I remember Dino's goal. I don't think any of us would forget that, especially as it turned out to be the winning goal and the only one of the match. But beyond that, I remember daft little things like Richard Garcia getting tackled on the byline. There was nothing insignificant. There was nothing remotely significant at all about it. He got tackled, and we got a corner. It was at the other end of the pitch. The corner came to nothing, but it's as clear as day. It's really weird how on these big occasions the things you remember are often the insignificant ones.
I found that I remember the emotions I was feeling more than I remember the specifics. I remember I'd been supporting the club since I was 6 years old, and I'd never heard the national anthem played before a Hull City game, so that made me feel very emotional, because it doesn't get much more significant than this. They're playing the damned anthem, where we're saluting the Queen and hoping God saves her from some cataclysm before Hull City are playing a game of football. But the other thing as well is, in addition to the goal, which was incredible, and our seats were fantastic because they were sort of right behind the goal, even though it was at the other end. But for me, it is that moment where Bradley Orr went down, and this is what I found interesting to know. What was a player's perspective compared to a fan's perspective? For me, it focused my mind for the first time on what we had at stake to lose. I'd never really considered we've got something to lose going into this game, because, 20 odd years of supporting City had taught me to not put that much faith in everything's going to turn out all right. So I'm sort of habituated to disappointment. I could live with that. I could have maybe even lived with losing the game. But at that point, when you've got like half a foot in the Premier League, and you suddenly start thinking about that, and that probably, I started off the game feeling very nervous. I was practically hyperventilating at that point because it just took so long. But what I'm fascinated to know, Bryan, is, one, how did that feel as a City player? But also, how do you think that felt for Bristol City? Do you think that would have had any psychological impact on them, having conceded a goal and then losing one of the cornerstones of the defence, and sort of having that massive gap before they had to start again? And sort of, how do City's players keep motivated at that point with a massive delay?
I think from our point of view, we were on our games, weren't we? We were totally focused. Obviously, Bradley Orr going off might have had a big impact in their team. I don't think it showed, if I'm being honest, because maybe defensive, we didn't really test them second half as much defensively, I don't think, because they had so much possession. They changed their shape slightly. They got a few different personnel on, more attack-minded threat come at us second half. And because Wayne Brown was struggling with a calf strain, we couldn't get off. He couldn't get out from the 18-yard box, so we sort of went into a low block and sort of went to 2 banks of 4, like we had done, like I mentioned. And in training many times. It was just about, could we see it out? Could and maybe get them on the counter, especially with Folan coming on late on. Could we catch them on the break? We nearly did a couple of occasions, but yeah, I think as a unit, we were just focused on keeping them out. And like I mentioned, there was some heroic defending going on and goalkeeping.
Let's talk about Dino's goal, because it was at the opposite end to where we were all sitting, of course, or standing, I think most of us, clearly. And it wasn't until we got about 4 or 5 different angles on the big screen after our initial celebrations had died down, not that they did that much, in order to be able to actually focus on what Dino had actually done, that we realised just what a sublime goal it was. Because when you're at the opposite end of such a vast expanse as Wembley is, you had no idea how close or otherwise to the goal Dino was when he hit the shot. And then you see it on the big screen, you realise he's on the edge of the box, and the keeper's scrambling across after what I still think is a massively underrated pass by Fraser Campbell, because he had to stand still and look up and had a second to see where Dino was, and then for him to chip the ball from a standing position onto Dino's foot without him having to break stride or even move slightly was a phenomenal bit of football from him. Great combination. But then when you saw on the big screen just how far away Dino was and how accurate the shot was, you realise it wasn't just a goal that could take us into the Premier League. It's one of the greatest goals, even on a technical level, that we've ever seen a Hull City player score. And it could have been, that could have been scored by Dino in 1992 against Hartlepool when he was playing under Terry Dolan. It could, because that's the sort of player Dino was. And he with the possible exception of that lob from the halfway line against Wickham, he reserves his best goal for Hull City for the most important occasion in our history.
Yeah, I know what you mean. I mean, you saw it was a beautiful goal when it flies past Basso's. I love it when a goalkeeper makes a really despairing save, and he had both hands out. You know, that sort of really adds something to a goal. You know, if a goalkeeper just watches it go into the corner, it's good, but you know,
you feel cheated somehow.
Yeah, exactly. I want some despair. You know, and you know, Basso was quite religious, wasn't he? I wanted to think Jesus had deserted him at that point or something. But yeah, obviously Dino's got his back to us from where we are, so you don't see the touch and the technique and how he'd watch the ball onto his foot and then volleyed it in. So yeah, you need it from our point of view, the replay, and presumably there would have only really been Fraser Campbell who would have had that front on see the touch, because pretty much all the rest of the City players would have been behind that. So perhaps that was the same for everyone, where you couldn't quite see the touch and technique. I don't know.
It was a fantastic goal, wasn't it? You know, I've seen him many times in training miss miles over the crossbar. But like you say, he saved us one of his best for an actual important day, and it was great technique by Dean. You know, I remember I roomed with Dean on the night we were room partners up for my whole time at Hull City, and I roomed with him that night and the night before.
Were you the first person? Sorry to interrupt. Were you the first person to see his new hairdo?
Yeah, I was.
Any comment?
It worked. But yeah. Well, waking up the next morning, we had a feeling, didn't it, the whole occasion, you know, with Barnby starting and Dino starting. I said to him, you're going to be the hero today. And it turns out to be that way, and you couldn't dream of anything to finish in a goal the way he finished that one.
He wouldn't let anybody celebrate him with him, would he? He ran off. He got a high, because if you watch the footage, he gets a high five from Ash, who's just standing still. Fraser, God knows why, but Fraser chases Dino to the other end of the pitch and jumps on his back, and we get a little bit of the replay, and then there's a moment where you're climbing on his back and saying well done to him. I think those were your exact words. It was actually quite a muted celebration, oddly, by the players, probably because nobody was going anywhere near where Dino was, because it was too hot to keep running.
No one has ever seen him run that fast. I think that was the thing. No, everyone just was in shock that he just scored a wonderful goal and then he was running away like that. But yeah.
No, that's exactly the point I was going to make. He covered about 80 metres in 3.5 seconds, didn't he? It was absolutely amazing.
He very rarely did run that far. The Bradley Orr injury happened, or at least the incident that led to the injury actually happened a good couple of minutes before Dino's goal, but he obviously had some sort of delayed concussive reaction and collapsed behind the goal after the goal had been scored. I think the game, did it restart briefly and then stop again?
Yeah.
And then that's when that long delay happened. So we got to, I think it was 11 minutes past 4 before the second half was allowed to restart.
We were playing with 10 men, didn't we? Because we had that corner where Turner sort of clambered over Adibola and sort of put a header just wide. You know, you often wonder if I always thought Bristol City fans were incredibly magnanimous that day. Almost a little bit too magnanimous. You want them to be a little bit gutted, and they were very happy for us, which There's one way it was really good, but another bit disappointing. But I often wonder, do they look back on that and sort of think? Granted, I'm pretty sure they didn't think Nick the Assassin Bambi had deliberately, like smashed up Bradley Orr's cheek or whatever. But I wonder if they look back and think that was a pivotal moment because they'd played a period, quite a period of the game with 10 men. And then presumably he's feeling the effects of that, when we're going forward. Could that injury be the reason why Dino had so much space, was so well on? I just wonder if Bristol City fans look at that injury as a pivotal moment in the game. Screw them.
I think you're right about them being magnanimous, not least, Brian. I don't know whether you'll agree with this because you're in obviously a different scenario to where we were, but there were long periods where Bristol City were the better side.
Oh yeah, certainly second half. They were well on top, wasn't they, in the second half? They threw everything at us. We defended well. But I thought first half was quite even. They had a little spell for 5 or 10 minutes early on. I think they started the better, if I'm being honest, not that first 15 minutes or so. But we sort of got into our stride a little bit. I just felt we just felt organised. We didn't feel as if we were going to get beat.
Did it matter that we'd not beaten them in the regular league season? They took 4 points off us, didn't they? They drew with us at home and beat us at their place. Did that matter at all?
No one ever spoke about it. No one ever thought in that build up to it, the 10 days or so, whatever it was. No one mentions that they'd done a job on us a couple of times during the season. It just wasn't irrelevant. It was just going into this one-off game, and our form at that time was pretty strong, and we were confident.
Our half time was about queuing up for £7 pints of lager and going, shit, this is actually going to happen. We're 45 minutes away. This isn't, I want to go home now. I'm going to shit myself, whatever else. All the other emotions that you go through in that scenario, especially when you've never experienced them before. What was your half time like? What was that dressing room like? What was Phil Brown and what was Brian Horton saying?
Calm, very calm. Just first part of the job was done. Like I said, I thought it was quite even the first half. We got our noses in front. And now it was about all of that hard work and that long season that we'd had. Now, can we see it out for 45 minutes? It wasn't about sitting in, but we had to sit in because of the injury to Wayne Brown. We had to go into that mode of defending for our lives, defending resolutely like we had done. And getting bodies around Brownie as and when they threatened, and that's what we certainly did well.
Do you know what's interesting? Sorry, Les. Do you know what's interesting? This is the first I've heard of Wayne Brown having an injury at Wembley. It was certainly not mentioned in commentary when you watch it afterwards. We couldn't see it from the stands, and Wayne Brown didn't seem to, from what I remember, and certainly from watching the game, to be sort of hobbling or running gingerly. So this is new information.
He had, I think he had a calf strain going into the game. And it sort of got worse as the game went on.
Maybe this is what was going back to the Sheffield United game when David Livermore ended up playing as an emergency centre-back. They might have something to do with that.
So was that evident at half-time that he was struggling then?
Yeah, it sort of came to light at half-time that he was. He'd obviously mentioned to the staff that he was getting sore.
Isn't it fascinating that we never brought him off? Was that just belief in the back four as a unit?
Yeah, I think so. I think Phil knew what we could achieve, even with Brownie being 70.
And I suppose as well, he's thinking he's playing Adebola. He's not playing a 20-year-old kid with loads of pace. He's probably still got the physicality to deal with Adebola, and as long as he doesn't stray out of position, can continue. That's fascinating.
They still had Byfield to bring on, though, who was much more sprightly, and of course Trundle was on the pitch. It also probably was to do with we didn't have natural cover on the bench. The only defender on the bench was Nathan Doyle, who certainly wasn't a centre-back. We saw Sam Ricketts in the Premier League play at centre-back a couple of times in an emergency, but it's not the time to find an emergency centre-back in a playoff final, is it? So I suppose... And Wayne Brown's the sort of character who would have said, no, it's fine, I'll carry on.
Yeah, I'll just carry on, and I think, like you made reference to it before, that moment of when Wayne jumps on top of Bowers Mile, Bowers made some great saves that day.
Was that just simply because his calf was twanging so much he needed a give?
I'm actually surprised he jumped that high. Because that is he got all second half. But
at what point did the heat start to have an effect on your fitness, on the pressure of the occasion, and especially if Bristol City had got an equaliser, there was another 30 minutes potentially to come. Were you in any kind of situation as experienced professionals where you were trying to conserve some energy?
Not conserve, no. I think the big Wembley pitch had a saying in it. We did feel as a group, we did feel a bit leggy, the end of a tough campaign. The heat didn't obviously added to that, but it just felt like the surface itself, Wembley, just drawn that sort of energy levels out of your legs, and it made you feel a little bit heavy at times, especially second half. I don't know if that was because we were under so much pressure from Bristol, but But yeah, it felt different, definitely.
I mean,
we were a normal game.
We were all drained emotionally by this stage, so heaven only knows what it was like to be physically drained at that point.
Did the pitch start playing slowly then? Did it dry out and play slowly? And if it did that make any difference?
No, it didn't play slowly. I think they watered it, and it was still zipping around a little bit. It was just the surface itself, you know, being a new stadium. It just felt like a real big pitch.
We get to the last sort of 10-15 minutes or so, and when we look back at the game as a whole, after Dino's goal, the City-related incidents, at least that we think of, are the two acts of defending by first Michael Turner with the block with his thigh from a shot by Lee Trundle that clearly was going in. And then shortly afterwards, across from the right-hand side, that I think Byfield was in the box ready to put it in with Myhill out of position, and Ricketts got across to clear it again. Those two acts of defending are almost as significant. Well, they are significant because they stopped Bristol City equalising, but they're almost as significant in your mind's eye and in the psyche of that whole occasion, Andy, as Dino's goal itself.
Yeah, and the far into us as well, and therefore every single time Bristol make an attack like that, you assume that's going to equalise because you're just waiting for that sick feeling of 40,000 Bristol fans. I saw that, but every single time, and I think they replayed both of those as well, didn't they? Because you can't see the Ricketts one; it's just too far away, and there's a melee, and then it flashes up on the big screen. And I know you shouldn't watch the big screen when you're at a live football match, but you can't help it sometimes. And you think, bloody hell, that was quite good.
I mean, from your point of view, as a guy in midfield who was back there helping his defence in the box, you know, you look at these two guys who make. I mean, Michael Turner had a phenomenal season anyway. He was player of the season by a mile. But Ricketts was brilliant that season. Andy was the following year in the Premier League as well. And those kind of epitomised their whole seasons. They'd been outstanding players all season, and that was the culmination of their their contribution.
It certainly was. And like I mentioned, I'd seen them do that many times in training. No one sees that we didn't get put under that much pressure in games in leading up into that game. You know, some of the games of the season, teams didn't have that much pressure on us. But yeah, that's what they're there for, you know, the defenders. That's why Wayne Brown was pivotal coming into the club as well, because he made Michael Turner. He made him a player. You know, it was the communication element, the distances that they had between each other was very good, and no more so than that day. Sam Ricketts and Dawson were excellent as well, along with Boaz as a back five the whole season. They were fantastic, and it actually all come to fruition in that final 45 minutes.
And we get right towards the end. Fagan's on for Barnby, Folan's on for Windus. The two Hull lads and two oldest players in the side have left the field, and we get a free kick. And there's a moment where Bryan Hughes almost grabs his share of the glory. Somebody asked on Periscope earlier, actually, did you deliberately miss it so that Dino got all the glory?
No, I didn't. I did fancy my chances actually from that side, and it's usually more.
I'm trying to remember whether you took any free kicks that season, because you only had one goal, didn't you? The goal against Southampton.
Dave wouldn't let me take any free kicks. He kept scoring them, didn't he? But he was off the pitch that time, so I thought, yeah, moment of the glory. And I fancied it. It was a good distance for me, and I got it up, but just couldn't get it down quick enough. Just landed on top of the net. And
in all seriousness, because it looked more like a left-footer's free kick, but it's because of the situation we were in. You didn't want Andy Dawson further forward, that he wasn't involved, because it wasn't just that one of you stepped over the ball and the other one took the free kick. It was just you on your own. It was obvious who was going to take it and what you were going to try and do.
Yeah, it was the last 5 minutes or so, wasn't it? Just thought, it would have been great if I'd have scored. You know, that would have been game over. But yeah, it was. I didn't miss it on purpose, just to save a bit more time.
I did think bringing on Craig Fagan was an excellent substitution, because he's a sort of irritating gnat of a player, isn't he? Where he would just come on and he would irritate the fuck out of the opponents and just, you know, and we were looking to contain them and they were moving forward. He was just the sort of player that would just go forward, niggle and irritate their defenders, just, you know, run the ball out of play as long as it's in that end of the box. I thought that was a great substitution, because that was exactly what we needed.
Yeah, and that's the sort of player Craig is, isn't it? You know, I come across Craig when I was at Birmingham City. He come through the ranks of Birmingham, and he was exactly the same then as a player. No, even at 17, 18 years old, he used to irritate the life out of everyone. And he's obviously gone on in his career and done exactly that all the way through it. And don't get me wrong, he had ability as well. He was a good finisher, but yeah, it was a good substitution at that time, because he gave us that energy. You know, like I said, we were on the back foot quite a lot of the second half, and he just gave us something to sort of get us out.
You know, when Bose Myhill caught the ball at the end and Wayne Brown jumped on his back, and 40-odd thousand Hull City fans cheered, as well as the rest of East Yorkshire watching back home. Were you aware of that cheer? And did you kind of realise, oh, that must be it then? Or, I mean, do you look at the clock on the big screen when you're playing?
Yeah, well, at that point, yeah, because we were under so much pressure.
That last long high cross from Trundle, and the world stood still at that moment, didn't it? Waiting for Miles to come out. Can he collect it? Because Adebola's up there, and he's a big lummox. He's not, you're not allowed to do what Nat Lofthouse did in 1958 and knock goalkeepers over by the shoulder into the net with the ball anymore. But actually, I would have thought he might have had a go at that. But Myhill timed his jump so perfectly that Adebola never got a look in.
Yeah, and I knew at that point then that it was all over. That was it.
Yeah, and it seemed to psychologically defeat them as well, didn't it? As if they felt that's it. And also, you had the bizarre spectacle of they had the camera on Dean Windus, and he was sort of like in It's a Scream pose like this, looming large over the stadium in a massive LED television. Yeah.
Well, the point is that Myhill then threw the ball out of play to Richard Garcia, and then the whistle went. So that was literally the last chance for Bristol City. The last chance had gone. When the final whistle went, we can all go mental on the terraces, on the stands, of course, and you can obviously celebrate. We've done it. All this wonderful preparation has come to fruition, and we've made a bit of history. But presumably, you've got to keep your emotions in check. Firstly, because there's opponents there, and you're all sportsmen. But secondly, because it's so knackering that you've got to just realise for yourself what you've done before you can actually start to celebrate.
Yeah, I think the initial feeling when that whistle goes is you do want to celebrate, and we have witnessed that when Brownie jumped on Boaz, and there was a few people jumping on each other, but then you do actually come away from it, and you have to congratulate your opponents as well, because it's hard. It's hard being in them situations when you're the beaten finalists. I've been in that as a League Cup beaten finalist, and it was tough to take. So obviously you have sympathy for the Bristol City players, but then once that's out of the wind, you just get on with it. Our fans were going delirious behind the goal at the far end. We just wanted to celebrate with them, and that's what we did.
I don't know whose idea it was to put Fraser Campbell in a black and amber wig, but I still wish they hadn't done it. Although it's now a match-worn wig, and Les is still trying to get hold of it.
I wonder if Andy Dawson regrets putting his Coca-Cola T-shirt on back to front. It's really obvious when you look at the pictures. You got the entire team with the trophy, and he's the only one who's got.
I was going to bring that up actually. I'm still really annoyed that you were made to wear them before the trophy presentation. Couldn't you have just put them on for the team shot? I mean, what happens there? Do the sponsors sort of get in the way of the players and say you must put that on, you must put that on, and you're going like, bugger off, I'm trying to celebrate here.
Yeah, we just got given them as soon as we were going up there to put on. Like you say, on the photos,
on a hot day when you're going up
I've
lots
got one
of
on
steps.
as well. I would have liked to have had my full strip on.
Yeah, on a hot day when you're going up lots of steps, what you really need is another layer of clothing, isn't it?
But you sort of, once you're in that moment and you've just won and you're going to the Premier League now, you sort of that emotion kicks in now. All that planning throughout the season comes to an end, and it's emotional. So someone could have given me anything and I'd have put it on. but yeah, it was just a fantastic feeling.
You'd been a Premier League player before, but for some of these lads, it was a new career peak. And when you look at especially Myhill, Dawson, Ashby, and also Ryan France, who wasn't in the squad that day, this was their third promotion. They were the guys who, assuming they got a game the next season, which of course they all did, were going to end up playing for Hull City in all four divisions. I know it was a team thing, but could you, as a slight outsider, let's be honest, compared to some of the others, see what they'd achieved on a local level and appreciate that?
Oh, massively, yeah. It's unbelievable, isn't it? At the end of the day, we're all professionals, aren't we? When you see 4 players, not just one, 4 players get promotion from every division, just absolutely fantastic achievements. And no one can take that away from them, and that's the most important thing. And they've represented the club unbelievably over the years that they've been at Hull City, and to have that sort of accolade of 4 promotions is unbelievable.
What was it like after the game for you, Les?
Just a bizarre sense of disbelief, I think.
He was happy, I promise.
Oh yeah. Well, I blubbed and
Yeah,
proper
so did I.
blubbed, and I even sort of grinned at my dad. I've spent most of my life despising that man, but it was like a brief bonding moment. I'm just really glad he was sat far away from me. Yeah, truly incredible. But yeah, just a sense of disbelief and trying to comprehend what that meant, not only on the day, but what it would mean and how it would change the football club. It was just not something we were used to at all, was it?
I think from players' point of view, I think it shows what the fans can actually get the players to achieve. Throughout that season, the fans were right behind us, especially the back end of the season, right through.
It was a great season for supporting as well as for playing, wasn't it? Just generally, everybody. I mean, you know, I didn't want to bring up the present day, but it's such a marked contrast, isn't it? When the players and the club and the supporters are all aiming for the same goal, you know, the sky does feel like the limit, doesn't it?
Yeah, we all felt like we were in something together as well. From around about maybe the West Brom away game onwards, you could feel, everyone could feel it. I'm sure you guys could feel it. That something was going on here. Something a little bit out of the ordinary was happening.
Yeah, we felt as players, you could feel, like I mentioned, haven't I, about the team bonds, and we felt something special was happening that season. Going into away games knowing that we weren't going to get beat, you know, and that's important.
You cried like a girl as well, didn't you?
I did. Yeah. Well, everyone was crying, weren't they?
Of course they were.
It was a very hot day after all, so you know.
Yeah, we'll just pretend it was sweat.
It wasn't. No, I did. Until my wedding day, it was the happiest day of my life, without any shadow of a doubt.
You qualified that very well, Andy. Well done.
Well,
yeah, we are broadcasting live. We might have a different opinion.
No.
And there's probably some bingo going on for this, but it was Les and I's birthday that day as well, and we were going into that because both of us have our birthday tomorrow, and we were both going into that game basically saying, right, from now on, all our birthdays are either going to be overshadowed by Hull City or ruined by Hull City. And fortunately for us, every birthday, mind you, the following year was when we played Man United and nearly got relegated from the Premier League. That was on the 24th of May and all.
But City had never played a competitive fixture on May the 24th.
No,
because
why would
normally
they?
our season's over by that point. You know, they say, don't they, May's when sort of legends are born, and it just wasn't something you were used to doing. So, you know, there's lots of City fans that can say, well, on my birthday, City played Hartlepool in 1968 or whatever. But yeah, it was an entirely new experience.
It was guppy fish at feeding time, wasn't it, for most supporters? Because aside from the tears and the hugs, especially when you walked out the stadium after the celebrations with the players did that thing where they all join hands and run and dash at the supporters and playing Can't Help Falling in Love over the speakers and all that. But when we finally left, the players went off and we finally went out of the stadium. And it was kind of I mean, there was obviously euphoria, but it was kind of an eerie silence a lot of the time because people were just walking around open mouth. What the hell have we just witnessed?
Yeah, in a way that you won't ever get another City playoff final, because I'm sure we'll go to more again in the future. But there was that one, the tube going back from Wembley to King's Cross was weirdly quite quiet. You'd think we'd all be climbing off the walls and there'd be beer flowing all over the place, but funnily enough, we were just sat quite quietly and almost trying to take stock of it. I hope you guys were having a better part than we were.
Maybe in shock, maybe the realisation kicked in, you know, next year we're going to be up against Man United or Chelsea or wherever it might be. That's what sometimes happens.
Yeah, perhaps the only thing like on the tube that top that was the season after, when I remember somebody after the game at Highbury had said, "Oh, what was the score?" And I went, "Oh, City won 2-1." And he went, "No, what was the score?" He just wouldn't. Sorry, yeah, no, the 2-1.
Oh, sorry, beg your pardon.
He just simply wouldn't have it. So that's my favourite tube City memory.
Well, actually, you mentioned the Wembley Park tube. I remember you talk about the Bristol City fans being magnanimous. I do remember a couple of Bristol City fans singing "Going Down" at us as we walked out. But the opportunity to be in a position where we're going down from the Premier League as opposed to not going up to the Premier League was one I would have quite happily taken at that point. So not every Bristol City fan was feeling as sporting as the ones that you encountered. But I think you're right, actually, that the vast majority did.
They were more magnanimous than I would have been.
Yeah, absolutely.
I've always felt quite sorry for Bristol City fans. I mean, I would never swap it, obviously, but I've always felt because they've not had another real crack at the Premier League since, and I wonder if they sit there and I wonder if, you know, they may or may not know that it's the 10-year anniversary tomorrow, but I wonder if they're thinking everything would have been so different if we'd done it, and this could have propelled us and we could have had a few goes and got to a cup final. And I've always just felt a little bit sad for them because they seem like an all-right bunch, and Bristol's a really good city, and I don't know if we would have ever got back, for example, if we'd lost that playoff final, would we have had another one?
If they'd lost the semi-final, though, we'd have been playing Neil Warnock's Crystal Palace in the final. Now, that would have been a much more fun victory. Not that we're taking away anything from the victory that we actually had. And I don't suppose we should go into what-ifery when it comes to the fact that we actually have a positive occasion to talk about rather than the prospect of us losing that match. Because it didn't happen.
Right for having Lee Trundle. I hated Lee Trundle. I don't know why. I always hated the way that the media treated him as like a lower league David Beckham. And I just never really got it. So, you know...
You probably came across him a bit in your early days, didn't you, when you were at Wrexham and he was at Swansea?
Yeah, he's a fellow Scouser as well. He's someone I know. Dealey Adebola as well. He's my son's godfather. Dealey Adebola, so we played together for numerous years at Birmingham City. So yeah, I had some strong links in the Bristol City team. So, but you had to put them to one side on the day.
I remember getting back to King's Cross for the last train back to Hull, and we had Joe Atkinson. I had Joe Atkinson with us, and because Leeds and Donny fans were due to arrive, they'd closed off part of the platform to keep all supporters separate. I mean, none of us would have been in any position whatsoever to take on Leeds or Donny fans if they felt like getting fruity when they got to
Fruity,
yeah, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
when they got to
Try and fight that off.
got to King's Cross. There was also, I mean, King's Cross has been massively refurbed now, but back then there was one bar along one of the side platforms, and it was shut. and I really wanted one last beer because we knew it was a dry train going back. But I remember sitting down with Joe Atkinson. We sat on the floor because there were no benches. We sat on the floor, and we never said anything. We were just so utterly emotionally spent. I think I even briefly fell asleep before being sort of shaken awake because our train had arrived. And even though obviously it was a greatly euphoric journey home on the train, I think you two guys both stayed overnight another night, didn't you? But the euphoric train home was quietly euphoric. There was an occasional bit of conversation going on here and there. But it only sort of started to build up in my carriage when JR Bluetoothed a picture of Ash holding the trophy up. It's one thing about the playoffs I've never agreed with, is that I don't think you should get a trophy for coming third when second don't get anything, but that's by the by. But the Ash getting the holding, I know I probably am, holding the trophy up, and JR Bluetoothed it through, and I found everybody's Bluetooth on the phone in that carriage, and everybody got this photograph all at once, and then things started to calm down, and people started singing and talking about the match. It was almost as if people didn't want to talk about it just in case it hadn't actually happened and it was all a dream.
It was weird, wasn't it? And our train, I did go home that night, and on the dry train, I'm sort of 10 cans alive because it was a dry train in name only. I think the police just saw it wading on with loads of stuff like that and realised we're not going to start fighting now, are we? For heaven's sake, I'm not going to fight anyway, look at the state of me. But,
especially 10 years ago.
Yeah. But then I think there was serving alcohol on the train anyway. I think as soon as it pulled away, the announcer came on and said, right, bar's open. So,
I think the celebrations for the supporters generally would have been fairly predictable, Brian. What were the celebrations for the players like? What did you do that night?
Back to the Grove. There was a party arranged, win or lose, for friends, family, you know. And it was, to be fair, it wasn't a mad one. It was a get together, some drinks, an outdoor sort of area it was, and it was nice. The party sort of started when we got back the next day. I think when realisation come in, people were tired from the game on the evening. So the Sunday we went partying, and obviously the Monday was the open top bus.
And that was a great occasion, wasn't it?
It was fantastic. Yeah, it was a great day for the whole city, and again we carried on right the way through the night. The players.
That was a great occasion. Dino singing and holding the trophy up. Do you remember that footage of Paul Duffin nearly having his head taken off when the bus went under a really low bridge? And he only ducked he was stood up on a chair, I think, on the bus, and he only ducked at the very last moment. That would have been messy, wouldn't it?
Dino singing, I mean, that must have been like a health and safety official's nightmare, because you just thought, oh, he's going to topple off here, isn't it? I wonder if there's people trying to capture that to get it on You've Been Framed or something. I also, when he brought out his book, I got him to sign it as "Let's Get Fucking Smashed," because I don't know what that is in Latin. Maybe we should have that as a club crest.
Question I've got to ask from a sort of honest place here. There was a bit of poison with this chalice, because in the Premier League, many of these playoff heroes were not going to be guaranteed first-team regulars anymore. In a way, some players were sort of signing away their Hull City careers, in a way, weren't they?
Yeah, it does happen, doesn't it, you know? I think Phil Brown got caught up in all that euphoria as well. He knew he had to strengthen the team and bring players in, and that's what he did. He went and brought people in like, you know, Giovanni, Kevin Kilban, players like that who've been in the Premier League numerous years, and people who he knew could do a job. And I think, like you say, some people get pushed to one side then, but it's testament that the likes of Ryan France got his opportunity to be one of them four who took the club to full promotion.
You talk about how amazing that defence was that season, and only Wayne Brown lost his place. He played one game. A lot of people think that he was slightly unfairly treated by Phil Brown that season. Although, if you remember what happened against Zaki and Heskey against Wigan, you know, you've got to be realistic about these things. He brought in Anthony Gardner, who was never fit, and then of course Zayati arrived, and we had for a short while a reasonably settled defence, but it still contained Myhill, Ricketts, Dawson, and Turner.
Yeah, and it saw us through the first half of that season, didn't it? I think as a back four, I think you've got to go back to the Great Escape of 1999 to think of a back four that you trust at the level it plays more, because it just felt unbreachable. One thing I wonder, I'm sure you've got stacks of belief as a team at the time, but honestly, now 10 years on, what would have happened if Bristol have equalised? Do you think?
Oof.
I think it would have been a tough extra time.
I suppose it depends on when they'd equalised as well.
If they equalise in the 92nd minute, I
Yeah.
can't bear to think.
I
of
think it
that.
would have been tough. Obviously, knowing that Wayne, obviously, we mentioned Wayne's cough and stuff, and we were on our last legs, weren't we? Come the end of the game, but yeah, it might have been a different outcome. I still would have backed us to seen it out and maybe gone to penalties. You know, that was the sort of spirit and the togetherness that we had that year as a group, especially as a back eight. So yeah. Oh, thank God we didn't get to that stage.
No, absolutely.
It was nerve-wracking enough. I think the second half. I can't imagine what a penalty shoot I would have done. I think I'd had to go home.
I can't imagine. Yes, I think Wembley would have been flooded with East Riding tears if Bristol City had actually equalised. Let's say that Lee Trundle chance that Michael Turner managed to deflect over the bar brilliantly with his thigh. Just on that subject of new players coming in, it did affect you. How did you deal with the situation where you knew you probably weren't going to get much game time or as much game time in the new season, and how did it affect, if at all, your relationship with Phil Brown?
Yeah, it was a bit patchy after that, I think, especially the first year that we stayed up in the Premier League. It was okay. I got a couple of opportunities, but I was mainly squad player on the bench numerous times. But yeah, it became a bit patchy. You know, I was doing okay. I was doing well in training. Some of the players were asking him why I'm not involved, why I'm not playing more. But the team was doing so well. It's like you might say that first few months of that first Premier League campaign, I think we were in the top 6 up until Boxing Day when we got beat heavily by Manchester City, and we were just punching above our weight. But then it sort of changed, and he wasn't changing the team enough for me, Phil. No, I think he got caught up in it himself. I don't know if he'll own up to that himself, but I just felt like, from a personal point of view, I was one of the ones who just got pushed to one of the sides, especially in the second year of the Premier League.
You went on loan to Derby, didn't you?
Yeah.
And you ended up going to Burton Albion at the end of that season, so you didn't see the demise of Hull City the following year, which led to Phil Brown being put on gardening leave. We are going to finish on a positive, obviously, but I just want to ask about that. As somebody who'd been so heavily involved, when that finally happened and Phil Brown did leave, what were your emotions?
I'll be honest, I was I actually cancelled my contract on the last day of the transfer window in the January. I think Phil stayed another 2 or 3 weeks after that before getting relieved of his duties, and it was Ian Dowie that came in after Phil, and I actually had a good relationship with Ian Dowie because he was a manager at Charlton for a short spell, so it might have just changed slightly for me, and I might have had another impact to play a part of the club. So I was gutted for Flynn, but I was gutted as well because I thought, I've left the club, and potentially if I would have seen it out to the end of the season, I might have still had a part to play.
Okay. You, of course, have become an adopted son of Hull. The very fact that you're still here, sitting in a kit room in West Hull, when, you know, you're not a local lad, we can tell from the accent and from your career history, but you've stuck around. You played for us for little more than a year, and yet you've laid down your roots here, which is absolutely brilliant for us to see.
Yeah, I've always sort of, as soon as I got here in 2007, I just felt like I belonged here. It was like an affiliation with the people. The people are great. They took to me really well. I've remarried a Hull girl, and I've stayed in the area. Obviously, I still do work for the club with the radio now, and it's going really well. So yeah, I think with regards to myself, it's great to be still associated with the club and seeing the different lads coming through, you know, through the youth team, like Jared Bowen and Max Clark and people like that, and getting opportunities in the first team. That's what you want to see, especially from now being associated within the area. You want to see the local boys coming through and doing well, and we've seen that this year.
And you two, just that immortality of that team. I mean, Brian's a modest man, and I'm sure there's 1 or 2 exceptions I can think of, but I'm sure most of them would be quite modest about their achievements that day if we had them all gathered in this kit room, and heaven only knows how much stuff Les would manage to nick off them while they were here. But it is history. It is immortality, because it wasn't just the fact that these lads, Brian and his teammates, did it. It's the fact that they were the first to do it. And you never forget the first time, irrespective of what you're talking about. But you never forget the first time. We've been to Wembley How many times since? We've been 3, haven't we? One more playoff final, plus an FA Cup semi-final and an FA Cup final. The FA Cup final lads will have their own immortality because that was a new occasion, a massive occasion when we were felt like we were at the very top of the game, ended up getting into Europe. But it has to happen for the first time. And these guys were the ones that did it. And you know, they never need to buy a drink in Westall again, do they?
I don't know, do you buy drinks?
Still buy drinks.
If you're out with Dino, then I can understand that. But go on.
It's the Wembley 11, isn't it? And I think whenever as a City fan you start talking about Wembley, everyone knows which one you mean. It's the 2008 playoff final. There's never any doubt as to which one it is. When we celebrate Wembley Day tomorrow, it's for the 2008 playoff final, and Wembley and that day are synonymous. The other ones are glorious, but in their own different ways. Pagger and Sheffield United, doing Chef Wednesday over in the final, and the cup final. They're all glorious, but it's your first one.
It is, and you just don't forget, do you? And you think about it most days when you're a Hull City supporter. I think any fan of any club is going to think about their club's greatest occasions most days if they're dyed in the wool as much of their club as we are with ours. And you think about the big occasions every day, don't you? I mean, when I sit down at my computer at home in my study, I've got this shirt, one of these shirts signed by all the players that I got that season in a frame directly above me. And you think, 2008 season, there's that shirt. What did we do at the end of that season? We went to Wembley and won.
I often spend time thinking, how do I get one of those track tops? I even saw Barry Lowe the other day, and it was the first thing I asked him about. Barry, what happened to the track tops after the first playoff final? He said he gave them to charity. Somebody needs to donate.
Barry Long charity.
Yeah, I think so. Somebody needs to donate one to this charity.
Do you think they're actually they're in his attic and he's just not keeping hold of them?
Well, I know where he lives.
Oh, fair enough. And lastly, all of you, that game, that 90 minutes, was the springboard for the modern Hull City. I mean, it's had its ups and its downs, although, let's be honest, mainly ups. We've had 2 more spells in the Premier League since then, which means, albeit with 2 relegations, there have been 2 more promotions. There's been an FA Cup final. There's been, all too brief, but a European campaign as well. All of that, all of the good stuff, as well as some of the bits and bats that have gone a bit wrong in the last decade, a springboard from 2008, 24th of May, Wembley Stadium.
Yeah, well, you talk about things that sort of shape the path that a club takes, and we mentioned earlier about when we signed Pedersen and Okocha, and it just adjusted the view that everybody had of Hull City. But when we won the playoff final and became a Premier League club, I think it changed the view of Hull City probably forever, because we're not just Hull City who've never been in the top flight. Now we're ex-Premier League Hull City, and that has a slightly different prestige to it. The fact that it must be easier for managers now to sell the club to possible transfer targets, because you say, well, we've been in the Premier League 3 times recently. It's got to be easier, and for us, we know that City finally did fulfil the potential that we always used to talk about, because we always used to bang on the fact that maybe one day we could reach the Premier League, but I don't know if we ever really believed it. But now we've done it, and all right, things aren't great at the moment, to say the least. But I think we always, now that we've done it once, we feel as though, well, it could. In the future, it probably will happen again.
And when you think about the depths that we were in of despair, the Great Escape season that we had to go through, even go back to the early 80s when the club became the first ever to be put into liquidation and so on. Think about and there were fairly recent depths of despair. Most of us can remember all this stuff that had happened in the bottom 2 divisions, and how quickly out of the last of those awful instances before we were suddenly at Wembley in a Championship playoff final looking for the riches of the Premier League. It's not so much that it happened, which is incredible enough given that we had 104 years of literally nothing happening to us, that was any good anyway, but it happened so quickly after we'd almost troughed. I mean, it was a decade before that we very nearly went down under Mark Hateley.
Yeah, I mean, we used to sing From Boothbury to Wembley, but I don't think we ever said it with any great conviction or belief that it would happen. It just scanned well as a song, and then we moved stadium, and within a decade, we've been there and we've played in the Premier League. I mean, I often use the expression in my line of work: all experience is an arch to build upon. Well, that game, it built more than an arch. It built cornerstones. It built foundations, and it set up the platform for all achievements of City to come.
Final question to you. There's absolutely no pressure on you here, given that you're sitting in the city of Hull, in a house in Hull, surrounded by match-worn Hull City kits and 3 guys who've just spent the last hour and 13 minutes talking lovingly about you and your teammates. But you did have a good and varied and long career. Where does this rank? Given that you did do good things with Birmingham City as well. Where does this rank in your career highlights?
Oh, it's the best. Along the two promotions that I had with Hull City and Birmingham City are the highlights of my career. I'll always remember them, you know. The Birmingham one, with regards to having all the heartache of losing the 3 playoffs and then getting through and winning the 4th one, was great. But then to go from, you know, Hull City going to the last day of the season the year before, just saving from relegation, to go in the following season to win the playoff final, was just unbelievable. I think, and then going forward as well, I think that following season, the Premier League, we actually topped the Premier League for a short spell as well, which was always good. Which was always good.
You still got your medal?
I've still got my medal, yeah. I've still got it. Can't find it at the moment. It's in some boxes.
Fingers crossed that you were going to find it, because I know you've just moved house. Fingers crossed that you were going to find it and bring it along today. But for those watching on Periscope, this is the very shirt. I mean, I've got long sleeves on, but you were wearing long sleeves at Wembley on a day like that. But this is the very shirt that Bryan Hughes was wearing at Wembley that day. That day being 10 years ago tomorrow. On behalf of all of us, and I don't just mean us three, I think I can speak safely on this occasion for every single Hull City fan who was there that day, and even those who weren't, who stayed and watched it at home or become part of the club as a consequence of that. You're going to have all of our eternal gratitude for the rest of your life, frankly. And thank you very much indeed on behalf of us three for coming to talk about it.
No, thanks. It's been great, and thanks for obviously sharing that day again with me. You know, the memories, the excitement, the sort of the nerves, just all reminds you of what such a great occasion it was.
And there's an official do at the club tomorrow, isn't there?
Yeah.
I don't know who's going to be turning up and who isn't, but at the same, you know, I hope it's a brilliant time, and I hope that, I mean, all you lads, you don't get together very often, do you? But I know you all still get on really well, don't you?
Yeah, we do. And Dean's organising it. Dean's a good friend of mine. We've been friends for numerous years. Obviously, from that, like I mentioned, we were room partners. He was the best man at my wedding, so we're really good mates. He's organising it tomorrow. It doesn't give you any information, just says get there for 6:30.
What could go wrong?
What's the dress code? Track tops?
Trainers, jeans. It's very casual, I think. It's not like a full-on.
I wonder if because was it a 5-year anniversary that they had an official one at the club, and Paul Duffin was there, and Richard Garcia did a satellite link up from Australia, and I think it was 5 years. Might have been. I don't know what anniversary it was. I think some supporters went to that. I think Chris Whiting went to that, amongst others.
It was Andy Dawson's event, wasn't it?
Oh, it was Andy Dawson's testimonial event, was it? Right, okay. So anyway, Bryan,